Welcome to Hope at Night, featuring Ryan Hayes, James Carter, Q&A with our live audience, and host Anil Kanda. Today's episode, does chemistry unlock the secret to life's origins?
One of the greatest questions of life is, where did we come from? Did humans truly evolve from a primordial soup of chemicals billions of years ago? Now, chemistry is kind of out of my element, but I'm glad we have a chemist and a biochemist to help us get to the bottom of this. Please welcome to Hope at Night, Dr. Ryan Hayes and Dr. James Carter. Welcome. Come on in, take a seat. Awesome. Ryan, glad you're here.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, your educational background?
Sure. Yep, so I have a PhD in chemistry, and I've been practicing chemistry for about 30 years, and I'm still trying to get it right. So now my area of chemistry, because there's a lot of different areas of chemistry, is I've learned how to put molecules together. We call it organic chemistry, and I study how they react and I analyze things, and I make nanomaterials. So I've been doing chemistry for quite a while.
So what got you interested in the origin of life?
A lot of chemists actually don't look at where did we come from. We're busy studying the molecules and reactions, and I felt a call to, let's start looking at that. So I started with some basic thoughts and experiments and tried to understand what's in our world, how does it come together. And so, about 11 years ago, I just thought it was something I should do.
It's such an important question, isn't it?
Very much.
James, what about you? What's your background?
Well, if you take chemistry and add biology to it, you get biochemistry, which is what I've been studying, and that's how life works at the molecular level. So studying DNA and enzymes and all these crazy complicated pathways. It's even if you had a photographic memory and you studied it every day of your life, you could still never fully understand the biochemistry of the human cell.
Ryan, what do you think is the criteria for design? What's needed for design?
Yeah, that's actually been a question I've been trying to wrap my mind around. How can you tell if something is natural or is it designed by a mind? And in many areas of science, like we said for SETI or in a crime scene, how do you know, was it a mind at work there, or did some natural causes take place to have the scene of an accident or a crime or something? And so we often think through this process, but it turns out in this unique area of science called the origins of life, they're not really allowing this idea of design. So I thought I would just practice a little bit here with you guys on how can you make this discernment between something that can happen naturally or something that's designed. So I have a picture there on the screen, and it is there's some stones there, and I just wondered if you thought those are a natural formation, or is that designed? Did an artist or some mind put them together? What do you think?
It looks like design to me.
Well, what made you come up with that?
Because that doesn't happen in the natural world on its own.
Yeah, so you could start coming up with criteria, right? You could stack them, and you realize, well, certain things can stack, and certain, well, that's not a very great picture. It looks kind of black and whitish, and well, maybe we could put a little bit of color into that. Now, if you look again, that's the actual. It's actually in a monument outside of Las Vegas, and my family and I were just there actually a few days ago. And we took some pictures, and those are about 30 to 40 feet tall, and I think it's called the 7 Magic Mountains, and it was designed by an artist.
I actually went there on the way
Wow.
to Zion National Park. One of my friends, he says, I've got to show you something, and I thought, there's nothing out here in the desert.
Yep.
And he showed me this amazing, rock structure.
It caught my attention about 7 years ago. We were driving by. They had just built it, and in the backdrop of all those really beautiful brown colors and stone colors, you see these vibrant. And it is just so stark in contrast that that was clearly designed by an artist. And so just like we could come up with some design arguments there, colors, how the rocks are stacked, maybe the size of them, we could kind of decide if it's naturally formed or did it involve intelligence or a mind. And so that's what I've been trying to do in the chemistry sense in some of these other areas in the origin of life.
You know what's really fascinating about this discussion is, you know, oftentimes you hear this, oh, scientists do not believe in God, scientists are all evolutionists, scientists believe there's a natural explanation to the world. But it's a breath of fresh air to know that there are scientists who say, wait a minute, the evidence is actually telling us something else. The evidence seems to be pointing to intelligent design and intelligent designer.
Yes.
You know, in fact, just recently, Stephen C. Meyer, part of the Discovery Institute,
right,
you know, which is sort of an intelligent design think tank, was actually on a show like Joe Rogan, the Joe Rogan podcast.
11
saw
million
that.
viewers, yeah.
Right.
That was amazing.
Right. So the discussion of intelligent design, whether you're an atheist or an evolution or agnostic or Christian, it's such a fascinating discussion because you're looking at evidence and saying, wait a minute, what else is it telling us?
Right.
Now I got a question. What is needed for the environment for life to exist?
That's a great question because we want to look at it from a design perspective. And so one of the things I've enjoyed doing as a chemist is just looking at our planet. We live on a very special planet, and I think most scientists would recognize that. Now, as a chemist, I've learned to start asking some different questions. And so I would like to try to do something that I do with my students and with other people. I have a very simple little flask right here, and what's inside there?
It doesn't look like anything is in there.
Well, that's what most people think, but there's something in there. What's in there?
Air.
Yeah, it's air. And I can drop this little puffball. I call this my puffball experiment. It's a little napkin with some tape on it, and it's pretty simple. And so now I'm going to just tilt it on its side here, and I'm going to like you to just blow that in.
Okay.
Blow real hard. Now, wait a second. How come that didn't go in?
You're the scientist. You tell me.
I love to hear students try to answer this question right here. Why didn't it go in? And most of the time they say, well, the air went in and then it blows it out. Well, we would have saw it kind of go in a little bit more and come out. Well, it is an air pressure, not trick, but an experiment called the Bernoulli effect. And what you did there was you've lowered the pressure, and then the high pressure air pushes it out. It's actually behind how birds fly, how airplanes fly. It's one of the mechanisms of creating lift, and I've just done it in a fun way. But then I start to ask, okay, air. Wow, you can't see it, but it's there, and this is chemistry. And what's so special about Earth's air? What do you think's so special about Earth's air?
It's breathable.
So it's very breathable, and we have a good amount of oxygen. And I started asking, well, how much oxygen is needed? Is there too much that would be bad, or too little? Then I started thinking about the other components, because as chemists, we like to know what's inside something. So I started thinking about, well, nitrogen. That's the other component. Most people overlook it because they can't see it. And so I consider nitrogen one of the most overlooked molecules in the whole world, literally and figuratively. And I started asking questions. What is so special about the mixture of Earth's air? Is there some chemical reasons for it? And when it comes to a design, something very quickly that I can just share is that just the amount of air that we have here. What if we had more air? What if we had less air? And I like to take people through a little quick thought process here. You know, air does a great job of blocking meteors, and you can kind of get a sense of that. How about you rub your hands together? Rub your hands together, everybody. What do you guys feel?
Heat.
Heat, yeah, there's a lot of friction there. And our air acts as like one hand and a meteor coming through, you know, from outer space, because there's a lot of them, and as they hit the air, it rubs together, creates friction and heat, and it explodes. So our air has a very protective effect on our planet.
So if we didn't have that air, our planet might look like the moon, and you see how many craters
craters
everywhere. It doesn't have an
everywhere.
atmosphere to protect it. Yeah.
Now, are you pointing out that that there are life-giving parameters on this planet that just make it absolutely conducive to life.
Absolutely.
And would you say this is in any other part of our solar system?
Well, just the amount of air is very important. We often don't think about it. We're like, well, you got to have a planet that has oxygen, for sure. So there's a parameter, right? Got to have oxygen for all of us to live on. But even something like the amount of air, why would that even be important? Well, we've just started to discuss it helps to block dangerous things from outer space. So you need that protection. So a planet with very little atmosphere like Mars or Mercury, these are not very good planets because you're not going to get the protection in there. But you're going to have to balance that with another important thing, and that has to do with the boiling point of water. So water, water is another very important planet. No water, you're not going to have life,
right.
Which is why many scientists are looking for water on Mars or even on the moon. So we're looking for water. If there's water, there's going to be life. But in order to have, it's not just water, liquid water, you actually have to have air pressure holding it down as a liquid. If there's no air pressure or not the right amount, it could all evaporate, or it would never evaporate. And so air pressure actually controls the whole water cycle, where it gets purified as a cloud and it rains back down and we get pure water from the water cycle. So who knew, right? And so this is the fun stuff I get to teach in my class, is air pressure, water cycle. And so having the right amount of air to protect you and to run the water cycle. And these are sometimes at odds. But a designer could come in and think about that. Now, most people would say, wow, there's billions of planets and stars and galaxies, so maybe there's just a lot of Earth-like planets out there. Well, we're going to find out as we get more studies of the universe, and we're looking at different planets. I think over 6,000 have been identified so far, and we know there's billions of them. But now we have all of these parameters. What are the life-giving parameters of a planet?
Right, and the thing we know about these life-giving parameters is if some of them are altered by just a fraction,
yep.
that it makes it difficult or impossible for life to exist.
Right, and that's what I'm trying to call attention to is, hey, look, if you just change the air pressure a little bit, we're going to mess up the water cycle. We wouldn't get the protection we need. If you change oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, all of these things, if you change them just a little bit, could have disastrous effects on our planet.
It's as if this planet was made for life. Mm-hmm. James, so Ryan just broke down what's needed for life, the environment, at least. He broke down what's needed for the right environment. What else is needed for life to exist? You're interested in biology, tell us.
That's right. Well, to connect it to ozone, the ozone layer, which is made of 3 oxygen molecules, is actually very protective to life because it's our planet's sunscreen. It blocks ultraviolet C light, which is the most damaging type of light to DNA. So if we didn't have that nice invisible shell of ozone surrounding this planet, we would undergo catastrophic mutation in our DNA. I mean, we already get sunburns just from the little bit of ultraviolet that comes through, and that is important too. We need that high energy light in order to make vitamin D in our skin. It also helps sterilize the surface of the earth. I mean, you think antibiotics are overused to kill bacteria? The sun is the best at killing excess bacteria, along with viruses that attack bacteria to keep them from overgrowing. So you have to have a balance in nature as well. You have to have the right amount. Too much of a good thing can become a bad thing. Even water is actually very damaging. Oxygen, we need it to breathe, it's very damaging. It's a very reactive molecule. Mm-hmm. It destroys, it reacts with our DNA along with radioactivity and water splitting the DNA. And our bodies spend a tremendous amount of energy and effort fixing all those mistakes that happen. Because if you destroy that code that programs you in the DNA, you're dead. To give you an idea, a recent paper came out that used artificial intelligence to help identify the number of protein enzymes that are involved in fixing all of the mistakes and chemical aberrations to the DNA and any kind of cuts that happen, some radioactive particle slices right through your DNA. There's 605 proteins involved in just recognizing those mistakes and fixing them. And if you didn't do that, you would be dead in a matter of days, yeah.
The criteria seems so astounding, so exponential. It's hard to believe this thing just came about by chance. You know, a lot of scientists theorize that, you know, at one time on our planet, there was a primordial soup. Some scientists speculate it was struck by lightning or something else happened, and you got a single-cell organism that came about from that concoction. What else is needed for a single-cell organism to even survive and thrive in life?
Well, you have to define life first, and there's a couple of different criteria that pretty much most scientists will agree on. So you have to be able to make copies of yourself. And so that is a very sophisticated process in itself because you have to do it faithfully. If you don't get at least 99% fidelity, accuracy when you're making copies of your cells, again, you acquire so many mutations that in a matter of days you're dead.
Referring to the ability to replicate.
That's right. I remember in an undergraduate microbiology lab, we grew these E. coli bacteria on Petri dishes, and these particular strains had just one mutation in one of the DNA repair enzymes, the one that's involved in fixing DNA damage when you get too much sun, too much ultraviolet. And so we grew these on the windowsill where the sun could reach them, put another couple of Petri dishes in a drawer where it's dark. A matter of 3 days later, the ones on the windowsill were completely sterile. There was no colonies growing. They had undergone so many mutations because they weren't able to fix them that they basically went extinct. We call it error catastrophe, where you get too many mistakes in the genetic code to be viable anymore.
Now, wait a minute. What if someone says to you, fine, I can agree that it's a challenge, but give enough time and give enough chance, anything is possible. How would you respond to that?
Well, let's talk more about what is needed for life. So we need to have the membrane, that every life form has a cell membrane, and that membrane isn't just like a soap bubble. This is a very sophisticated, protein-rich membrane with all these special channels that can decide what's going to go in and what shouldn't go in, and it needs to let out things like toxic waste buildup from metabolic products. So this is a very, very complex structure, this membrane. What else do we need? We need, you have to have some sort of information-bearing molecules like DNA or RNA, so you can pass on information when you replicate.
Energy.
You got to be able to harness energy. So lightning, yeah, it's a source of energy, but that same bolt of lightning can also fry whatever fledgling life is trying to eke out of the primordial soup. It destroys molecules just as readily, if not more, than it would create tiny little molecules. And it's like, throw Legos in a trash bag and shake them up, or a puzzle piece, and you might find 2-3 pieces that accidentally come together. But what happens the next time you shake it? It's going to break apart, right? Yeah. You're never going to get this huge Lego castle or a working car with gears and everything that comes out of that trash bag just through more time and more chance. And eventually, you shake it enough times, those pieces are going to break apart. The Lego pieces themselves decompose. So to answer your question about just add more time or add more planets, there's got to be billions of them out there, right? No, time is the worst thing you could do because all of these molecules have expiration dates. I mean, even your water bottle has an expiration date. What? H2O doesn't expire. No, but the plastic holding it does because it's an organic compound. We're full of these organic compounds that are very fragile. Some of them on the order of minutes. Right. They will break down if they're not repaired or rebuilt.
It's fascinating. I remember in elementary school, or I should say maybe even junior high, I remember the teacher teaching that, at one time life began because of a primordial soup. I've noticed a lot of even evolutionary biologists have even moved away from this idea and say, wait a minute, it might have been aliens, it might have been crystals, it might have been meteorites that hit our planet. They're looking for any reason besides an intelligent designer bringing about life upon this world. Now, you guys got a video clip for us, don't you?
That's right, yeah. To illustrate how serious this problem is with the fragility of molecules, Ryan and I actually met on YouTube during the pandemic. Some of my chemistry classes were canceled, so I'm like, what can I do? And I've been interested in this origin of life and creation, evolution, science, faith debate since high school. And I saw Ryan on a YouTube channel, and I was commenting, and we connected afterwards. And another scientist who's a biomedical engineer named Rob Stadler, who was trained at Harvard, MIT. He's also interested in this stuff. So we got together and we thought, how can we try to bring this down to the level that non-scientists can understand it? So Ryan recruited another biochemist from his university, because you can never have too many biochemists. Yeah. And I recruited a friend of mine who's a geologist to throw in that part of the origin of life. So we really covered the kind of sciences that you need to understand for origin of life research. And we meet each week on Zoom to make these scripts, and we've got a clip here of one of our animations that you can find on YouTube. We have about 6 of these animations up so far, and they're doing pretty well. We have about 1 million views so far. Awesome. But yeah, let's take a look at this.
Yeah, but given enough time or enough planets in the universe, surely anything could happen. What if we had billions of years?
Some problems are not solvable by time. When people assume that lots of time is abiogenesis's best friend, it seems reasonable. But it's exactly wrong. They're not BFFs. At best, they're frenemies. Yes, time gives more opportunities for things to happen, but what's overlooked is that it also gives more opportunities for time to decay and destroy the trace amounts of biotic material that may have been created. Some of these molecules are very fragile. Their half-lives can span from merely decades, not millennia, all the way down to just days or even minutes. The origin of life is not like a very long journey by foot, where if you could just make a little bit of progress, just one single step, given enough time you could make it any distance. This is a problem of a different category. It's more akin to attempting to walk to the moon. Time won't help that sort of problem. Why not? Well, to give you a rough idea of how large the chasm is, these experiments have produced small molecules like this. And this is just some of what they need for even a very simple, single-celled organism. Thousands of chemical ingredients must be present in the same place at the same time, the correct concentrations, chirality, with no ability to tolerate anywhere near the level of impurity found in undirected chemical processes or in the lab. Living organisms handle this by making most of the chemicals they need for themselves, on-site and on demand. But of course that wouldn't be possible before they existed. The chasm between the starting point and the simplest possible life form is so large that abiogenesis is hopelessly and forever off limits to the mechanisms in question. It's not that there isn't enough time, it's nonsensical, like asking how heavy is blue. It's simply the wrong question, and it betrays an ignorance of the scope of the problems involved. In spite of the observable data and our own experience showing us that, left to its own devices, life only goes one way, toward decay and degradation, some still have faith that it could have gone the other way in the distant past with the origin of life. So, when you see statements like, "Life arose via chemical evolution," that sounds scientific. But that claim is more akin to alchemy or a horoscope than to science. Lots of narrative and hope, but little actual evidence. And so they rely on imagination and people's scientific ignorance to be persuasive.
Wow, that's an amazing video. I'm really excited about this discussion and where it's going. But hang on right now, we're gonna go to a break, but when we come back, we're gonna continue this fascinating conversation on the origins of life. So don't go away. Welcome back to Hope at Night. We've been talking with chemist Dr. Ryan Hayes and biochemist Dr. James Carter on the likelihood of life evolving from a chemical soup. Ryan, we just watched this incredible video, and it kept bringing up this term biogenesis, abiogenesis. What is that all about?
Right, so that is a great word. It's a long word, it's like a college word, but there's some fun ways to break it down. So Genesis is a word many Christians are familiar with. It's the beginning of the Bible. It's really the beginning of how a lot of Christians think things got started. So Genesis is to create, bio is life, and then if you put an A in front of a lot of words, it makes it the opposite, right? Theism, atheism is the opposite. So it really is just a word to describe, can life, bio, Genesis, get started from nothing? Chemicals on the ground and the earth, from a meteor, from a warm little pond, hydrothermal vent in the ocean, from wherever, can they come together? And I think what we're trying to do is, hey, what is life all about? What are all of the pieces that come together in life? And we were already discussing all of the different parts. So one time I looked up, hey, I wonder how many molecules do you need for life? Just how many? And I found it in a biology textbook. I thought I would find it in a chemistry textbook, but it was in a biology one. And it said, in the simplest life, you need 3,000 or 4,000 parts to come together. And many of them were enzymes. Now I'm going to throw what an enzyme is over to James, because that was something that was kind of missing from that big, long diagram that we saw there.
Yeah, that map is what makes my biochemistry students cry right before exams.
Yeah, I've seen the crying.
What is more amazing is it's actually very much more complicated than that. Everywhere you saw an arrow on that map, there is a protein called an enzyme that speeds up chemical reactions. And to give you an idea, the molecules you saw on the map were like those tiny ones in the upper right corner. That far right one is glucose, that's the blood sugar. And then ATP, I think you probably know what that is. It's the energy currency of the cell. It helps power a lot of the enzymes. And that big blobby thing with all those little spheres, every one of those spheres is an atom, and they're sharing electrons with another atom. That's what the lines are connecting them. So that is how complicated an enzyme is. They're typically around 300 amino acids long, sometimes even much bigger than this one. They have a little bit of wiggle room to them. And in that little pocket in there, that enzyme is going to grab onto the two molecules and transfer a phosphate from the ATP to the glucose. And that's its job. It's to turn one chemical into another chemical. So all of those arrows are fancy, complex enzymes that move, that are regulated, that do incredible things. They speed up chemical reactions sometimes millions of times faster than what they would happen on their own, Sometimes it takes energy to overcome these chemical reactions that wouldn't otherwise happen.
So life is full of these enzymes because chemistry left to itself naturally is either too slow or it's rarely too fast, but it's too messy. Or it breaks down. And so these little micro machines or nanomachines that are all over in living systems fix all of those things. And if you don't have them there at the beginning, how do you get life? Because the natural chemical reactions, they're too messy, they don't happen at the right rates, and that's what we're starting to get an appreciation for.
Yeah, the glucose, the blood sugar, if you get too much of that in your blood, I mean, we need some of it to survive, but diabetes is basically having those sticky little sugar molecules attach randomly to proteins in your cells. So when you get your hemoglobin A1C levels checked, see if you have diabetes, that's what's happening. Rogue chemistry. You let these chemicals just react, you end up with bad things.
It's bad.
Ryan, talk to us about DNA.
So those enzymes are so important. They help manufacture DNA, the information storage molecule. I think we all know that, you know, the color of our eyes and our hair and our skin and how tall is all programmed as information in our DNA. And what I love to show to people is how much DNA we actually have. Because those enzymes, they have to go around, we were mentioning that, 605, I think, or something like that, 650?
Yep, to fix mistakes.
To fix mistakes. And I'm like, well, how big is this DNA thing anyway? You probably just have a little bit. So I have a little cell, if you would, this egg. A nice little Easter egg here. And I'm just going to go ahead and open it. So this is like a cell, perhaps that's in your body. And if I open it up, there's another little gift inside. And this is the nucleus.
Yeah.
And inside the nucleus is DNA. And so I have that here as a fun, sparkly little string. And I think if you look at DNA under the microscope, it does actually look like string. So string is one of the best ways to kind of think about DNA, or extension cords or anything. Have you ever had extension cords pull out and get all wrapped together?
All the
Christmas
time.
lights.
Oh, Christmas lights. I get so frustrated when I'm trying to do something with string and it's all knotted up. You know, DNA gets knotted up just like a string does. But there's these enzymes that go in. One of them is called topoisomerase, and it will fix knots because it's a string. and it will have these knot problems.
To do that, it's got to cut the DNA, has little arms on it to grab onto those loose ends so they don't fly away, pass it through another strand, and glue it back together.
I wish I could do that with an extension cord, but I usually don't want to cut it and put it back together.
So we have these intelligent machines whose very purpose is to straighten out the DNA.
Just to straighten it out. All those problems you have with string, DNA has the same problem.
The cutting and the gluing has to be present at the same time. Could you imagine if you had an enzyme that just started chopping up your DNA and it didn't have the ability to glue it back together?
Well, let's talk about how big this DNA problem is. Well, in a simple organism, there's about 6 feet. But when it comes to complex organisms like ourselves and animals, we have lots of cells that have DNA in them. So we've got 6 feet here. So it's about 2 meters if we have a metric audience here. And now, how many cells do we have in our body?
37 trillion, give or take a few 100 billion.
Yeah. So that's 37 with a lot of zeros behind it.
Times 6 feet.
Times 6 feet, divide by 5,280 feet in a mile, and you get a lot of miles. So we've done a little calculation on this, and this is kind of fun. How far do you think that would stretch? If you were to put all the DNA in your body end to end, how far do you think that might stretch?
To the moon and back 1,000 times?
Yeah. So if you line up your DNA, you would start from the sun and would go all the way out to Pluto. Now, I'm not saying Pluto's a planet or not. We can have that discussion at another point. But it's out there. And so your DNA would stretch for the sun to Pluto and back and forth 12 times. That's 42 billion miles of DNA that you have inside of you. And if any one of them break or get twisted or somehow malfunction, you're going to get cancer and you're going to die, or that organism's not going to live. This is an astronomical problem because that's your information. So even
imagine all that DNA that has to be fixed and cleaned up and double checked and copied. Your cells can make a copy of that DNA in a day.
Well, hold on a second. I remember reading about the Miller experiment in my high school textbooks on biology.
Right. Yeah, we know it well.
And they seem to argue, at least this experiment seemed to argue that, wait a minute, we can create the basic parameters for life. What would you say to that?
Well, we've analyzed that experiment quite a bit, and in one of our videos we discuss it in more detail. And ingredients is what they're talking about, are very important for making things. But I have a lot of the ingredients for making cookies in my house, but I don't get a lot of cookies popping out. So that we could start with there. But analyzing what you need for ingredients for life, like I said, you need 3,000 to 4,000 precise ingredients. And what they were able to make in that experiment was really interesting. They were able to make some amino acids that form the building blocks of proteins.
You know what else they made? Hydrogen cyanide and formaldehyde, 2 things that are toxic to all known life. The formaldehyde is what they put in embalming fluid because nothing will grow in it.
Yeah.
And cyanide, that's what they used in World War I as a poison. So good luck getting life to eke out of that primordial.
So they don't talk about that. They don't talk about that 99.9% of it was garbage.
More than 99%.
More than that. I was being generous.
Like trillions of molecules that are useless or toxic to life for every one that is
you got all this
beneficial.
Garbage.
Right.
You got toxic materials that were also made. And they also didn't say that if oxygen was around in that experiment, you wouldn't get any of that. And these amino acids were not even proteins because it was done in water, and water actually breaks apart proteins. A lot of things that your textbook and the experimenters here left out.
I guess I need to throw out that biology textbook.
Well,
So let me ask you this. The origin of life. Let's say maybe God used long process and he used time and evolution to bring about life. You guys are arguing, wait a minute, no. The Bible is teaching this fiat creation, this immediate creation that God brought about. Does it really matter?
It's a great question, and now we're getting into more of the worldviews, which science does touch on. But you could look at it as a kind of a dichotomy. Either God exists, there's supernatural, it takes some kind of intelligence. Intelligent design doesn't define that God, but for Christians, it's the God of the Bible, some sort of brilliant, creative being. or nature had to have some way of coming up with this stuff. And so it's a true dichotomy. In 70 years of research in abiogenesis, all that has been accomplished so far is just creating a few of these building blocks, along with a bunch of garbage too. But you can't get these to assemble together into long chains. Life needs to be able to make these polymers, these chains of molecules. You need the amino acids to link up to make proteins. You need the nucleotides to link up to make DNA and RNA. You need sugars to link up to make complex carbohydrates, like the structure that makes up plant cell walls. And we need lipids, are a form of polymer as well, of hydrocarbons. And the problem is scientists haven't been able to get the necessary requirements, because I don't think it's possible to have an environment where it's conducive to life and can build these polymers without the help of very sophisticated molecular machines, because water is constantly going to be trying to chop up these polymers into pieces, along with all the other things like we discussed, the radioactivity. So what does that mean? If it's not possible for life to come about through chemistry, if this is truly a dead end, just like alchemy or perpetual motion machines, what does that leave us with? I mean, how did everything come about, even the origin of the universe? How do you get all the matter and energy from literally nothing? How do you get the fine-tuning of all the laws of the universe from no mind? So let's take the case of there being a mind behind this all. What is the character of this God? Is this a God that kind of sat back? Maybe he wasn't that powerful, so he had to rely on chemical evolution and biological evolution to get his life. Well, is he worthy of being called creator and being worshipped if he was very hands-off and maybe kick-started a few things and then sat back for millions of years, and then eventually had humans come along that he says don't kill, even though death is the very crucial component of evolution. You can't have evolution without death, because you have to get rid of all the failed experiments, all the billions and billions of organisms. I mean, right now, 99% of all organisms, the species that have ever lived are extinct. So that's a very cruel, brutal world we're talking about. And if the God is supernaturally strong, omnipotent, that means he had the power to create life in an instant, but chose not to. I mean, that seems like a cruel and lazy thing to do, to have all of these animals suffering
James,
for so long.
What I'm hearing from you is the reason why it's incompatible is because that it requires death.
Right.
And not just, we're not talking about the death of a cell, we're talking about the death of organisms.
On a large scale.
Large scale.
It's completely inefficient, the process of evolution. You've got to tinker. And when we've done long-term evolution experiments, we haven't been able to get novel features. Evolution can select from what's already there, and the best of that will go on to survive, but it doesn't create new information. I mean, we go from a simple cell. I say simple because even the simplest cell still needs
not simple.
A minimum of like 493 genes, as long as you give it vitamins and some amino acids to grow on, and go to where we are today with our 3 billion base pairs of information. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of information. If you printed out all the information that codes for you, that programs you, on a book in size 4 font. I mean, I'm 48, I can't read size 4. Single space, how many pages do you think that would take up? 1,000, 10,000? 122,976 pages of your information on 130 volumes about this big. It was basically an entire couple of shelves of a library of your programming information. So how do you get from whatever crawled out of the primordial soup to that, when we don't even have a plausible mechanism for creating new information? Evolution doesn't do that.
Right. It seems that we can witness changes over time, adaptation over time, but the idea of sort of macro changes or macroevolution doesn't seem to be advantageous to a species. There's information that's lost, and it just leads to sort of a digression of that. I've heard it said that you can turn a wolf into a dog, but you
Right.
can't turn a dog back into a wolf.
Yeah, I can't backbreed Chihuahuas into like great wolves.
Now, let me ask you this before we go to some questions, and that is this. You guys have both studied out intelligent design. It's very obvious. You guys have plumbed the depths, and it seems like there's still this eternity of areas of study that you still need to check out and investigate. Based upon what you have found in your study of the molecular level of life, biology, chemistry, intelligent design, what does that tell you about the Creator? What does it tell you about his character, about who he is?
That he's very meticulous, he plans ahead, he's loving, because I don't think a loving God would just kind of roll the dice and let this chaotic experiment of millions of years of evolution take place, only to say that he created us in his image and say that killing is wrong. He is incredibly powerful. I mean, if he has the ability to resurrect people, resurrect Jesus, I mean, if Paul says if Christ is not risen, then your faith is in vain. So if he's powerful enough to create a human being like that, why would he take millions of years to do it in this long process? So he has that power. If he has that power and didn't use it, I would really question the character of that kind of God.
I see a very loving God who doesn't leave much to chance. He leaves a little bit. And you see that looking at the air. He's protecting us. You know, we love our kids. As a father, I love my kids. I want to keep them safe. And I see a planet that's built in with all these protections to keep us safe, all the way down to molecular level, but at this macro level as well. So we see love as protection, love as providing. I think of my dear mom. She made me peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for like 2 years when I was a kid. And I always wanted that, but she always provided that. She was trying to do other things, but she loved me so much, she kept providing. So when we see provision, when we see protection, we see things not left to chance and they're being fixed and repaired.
Symbiosis, you know, instead of it just being survival of the fittest everywhere, there's a lot of mutualism.
Working together?
Yeah.
Partnerships.
And if you're ever feeling lonely, just remember you've got about 10 times as many bacteria in and on your body as your own cells. And they help us. They give us B vitamins. They help train our immune system. I mean, there is so much interconnectedness in life that it's not something that you just get one thing here and another thing there, and then maybe later they'll work together. They have to be there from the beginning, all working together. Part of the atmospheric cycle, the carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle. These all require
amazing
bacteria and plants, and you know we breathe out the waste product that makes trees grow, the carbon dioxide.
James, Ryan, really appreciated this discussion, and I can say this for a certainty. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist after hearing from both of you two.
Yeah, it's a good book, by the way.
Well, it's time to go to a break, but when we come back, we'll get to hear some questions from our live audience for our guests tonight, so don't go away. Welcome back to Hope at Night. We've been talking about the origin of life with chemist Dr. Ryan Hayes and biochemist Dr. James Carter. I'd like to turn to our live in-studio audience for some questions now. Do we have any questions? Right over there.
Hi, I just wanted to know, why do you think many scientists are atheists?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think it's kind of the leading way to go. I think a lot of scientists want to know what can happen naturally on its own without help, because it almost seems like creationism to a lot of people is a cop-out, like you're just giving up. And we're not. We're trying to say, look, there's molecules and they behave a certain way, and what we see in life is completely opposite. So I think we're just in that phase right now, and have been for a long time. What happens naturally? And that kind of leads you, it can lead you away from this God idea, that there's a God behind things, putting things together. So I think that's how I would see that. You know, a lot of scientists maybe just don't want to talk about it too. And I think the given, trend line in science is, let's leave God out. And I get that, and I can appreciate that. And what we're just trying to say is, okay, if there is a God, where did he come in? And how can you tell the difference?
Right.
The challenge is that God is often left out of the conversation to the point where even scientifically, many scientists don't understand the other side of things because we keep that out of our public universities. We have a separation of church and state in this country. So when you're only told one side of the story and not given any evidence for the other side, it's very easy to come to just that one conclusion that you've been taught most of the time. There's other philosophical and psychological reasons too. I've listened to a lot of testimonies of ex-atheists, and sometimes it just comes down to they have issues with their father, and God reminds them of their overbearing, tough, rule-enforcing dad. And but it's not always the psychological component. I think it's just a willingness to be open to the evidence, all of the evidence.
All of it.
Right. All right. Do we have any other questions? Right over there.
Hello. If there are devised systems for scientific occurrences like enzyme functions, for example, helicase and DNA polymerase, and also their nucleic positionings like adenine pairs with thymine, and then you have guanine and cytosine, which are responsible for life, how can scientists and the like leave room for a belief that God doesn't exist?
Does not exist.
When you see all of that, when you see all of these amazing things that are precise, how can scientists think that there's no God? That's a great question. I think there's a commitment probably to believers that we want to believe that there's a God, and there's a commitment, despite sometimes very obvious evidence, that there is no God. And there's a faith component that a number of scientists have, because it's amazing. And you see a number of scientists who are studying something in this level of detail, and they're just amazed at what they're seeing. So life is amazing. They're just willing to commit to, well, that's what billions of years does.
At some point, they're going to have to take a faith stance, because some of these questions, we can't go back in time and see how it would be done naturally. So there is a certain component where you just can't use the empirical scientific method to go back and look at historical events. That's not how the process works. So it comes down to a faith in the origins.
Eventually, the person has to confront this idea of faith.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wonderful. We have any other questions? Right over there.
Yes. So, if God created life, who created God?
There is a philosophical argument called the Kalam cosmological argument that anything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe had a cause, and therefore something had to cause the universe. Now, God would be the one thing that does not have a cause. He's causeless. It's hard for us to wrap our minds about something that can just be eternal like that and not have a cause, but he would have to be outside of space and time in order to create this universe. So it's kind of a trick question, like making a square circle or something. It's not a philosophical possibility to create this God from nothing. He had to have always existed and be outside of creation. So he was causeless.
It almost seems, as you're looking back into eternal history, or whatever you want to call it, eventually you come to this place where there needed to be something that was outside the limitations of
the uncaused cause.
That's exactly right.
Right.
Wow.
That's what we would say, I guess.
All right. Fascinating.
All right. Good
Any
question.
other questions? Right over there.
Did man as we know it today evolve from Neanderthals?
Well, they've got enough scraps of DNA from some Neanderthal skeletons that they've been able to piece together what the genome of a Neanderthal type being would be, and it turns out to be very, very human. Like, it's probably a Homo sapiens. In fact, when you get your DNA sequence, they'll even tell you like what percent Neanderthal you are. So yeah, probably we could, if they were alive today, you would be able to breed with them. But I think your bigger question is, did we evolve from this progression of a common ape ancestor? And you probably heard the figure that we're 99% similar to chimpanzees, and at some point there was some ape that we shared a common ancestor with. Turns out that is a big overestimation. They were just sequencing proteins DNA that codes for proteins that are very similar to us, like chimps and humans have muscles, we have hair. You would expect to see a lot of the same things, especially if there was a common designer. It's not necessarily common descent. But think about what, even if it was 1%, and the new figures now that we've completely sequenced the human genome and the chimp genome is almost complete. There's a whole bunch of DNA that's repetitive and it's hard to sequence, but it may only be like 15% dissimilar. So 1% difference of 3 billion means 30 million base pairs difference.
Which is a lot.
Now, supposedly we broke off from this common ancestor 4 to 6 million years ago. How are you going to get 30 million changes and hundreds of genes that exist in humans that don't exist in chimps? So there's new information there. When you're only passing on about 100 mutations per generation, I mean, the math just doesn't add up. We can't get that many differences even in 4 to 6 million years. So the hominid evolution thing is very complex. It is difficult to draw the line between what is ape and what is human, just looking at a couple of fragments of bones. I mean, we only have enough bones that would fit in the trunk of a garage. There's just not a large enough sample size to be able to distinguish these features.
Great insight. We have any other questions? Right over there.
Any other evidence to support your theory and discount the other theory?
One of my, I'm working on a review paper right now. It's a comprehensive evaluation of these findings of partially degraded organic compounds that are found in, say, dinosaur bones, really supposedly ancient materials. And I told you how fragile things like DNA and protein are. Well, I've gone to the forensic science journals that actually measure, because they find a body and they're like, okay, was this person killed 60 years ago, 80 years ago, 100? So they know about the rate at which these biomolecules degrade. And guess what? We're finding them all throughout the fossil record. And it doesn't seem to be like the further you go down, the more degraded and old they are. It's just sort of a jumbled up mess. So I remember in grad school around 2005, they found a T-Rex with stretchy tissue and what looked like the remains of red blood cells. And I mean, when they pulled it with the tweezers, it snapped back into place. I mean, I can't even keep rubber bands in my drawer without them breaking and losing their elasticity. And these are supposed to be 65 million year old proteins here.
But James, it's not just a T-Rex. There were other dinosaurs that were found with tissue there.
More than 100 samples have been analyzed and found organic remnants of the original tissue.
It throws out
not fossilized.
Throws out that timeline that's been suggested.
And it feels like it.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, that's why I like the study of decay rates of organic compounds, because it helps answer the origin of life issue. You can't have these things sticking around in a primordial soup. And it also explains how you could have all life living contemporaneously a few thousand years ago max.
Ryan, how would you contribute to that question?
Finding tissue in dinosaur bones was like a mind-blowing thing, I think, for many scientists, and how to deal with that. There's just a lot more chemistry things that we didn't talk about tonight that I would love to go in more detail. I'll just mention one real quick. Your blood has iron in it, right? Hemoglobin, that's why it's red. Well, it wants to connect with oxygen. And we see iron and oxygen, especially in Michigan, connecting all the time. We call it rust. And to keep your blood from rusting is this just a miraculous dance to get oxygen close enough to the iron so it can be carried, but not close enough to where it sticks and makes iron or makes rust. And so there's just all these little chemical things that happen that blow my mind that I've studied, and you look at it. So I would say there's a lot more chemistry things that we've left out. That
chemical fine-tuning.
The chemical fine-tuning kind of thing. And our Earth being really radioactive. Why is it so radioactive? Because it's really damaging. But it's actually a way to heat the planet, to keep it at the right amount of temperature for a long period of time. But we have the built-in DNA protection mechanisms. And so you just see this, there's the cycles. You kind of alluded to that. where one thing gives off something and another thing, processes it. It's just the interconnectedness.
There's so much engineering foresight too. Like, okay, this is going to be an issue, so we need to plan several steps ahead.
Right.
And when you study these pathways, it runs like, your cell is more complicated than New York City and has a lot of the same features. There's a railway system, except it actually builds itself like a monorail, these microtubules that assemble, and then these little kinesin proteins that walk along there carrying big vesicles full of goods to be delivered to other parts of the cell. You have a security system, your immune system, telecommunication system through these cytokine messengers that are released, a data storage system, your DNA. There's so many parallels to what we see brilliant engineers and city planners doing that you see in nature as well. Completely parallel, analogous.
So much of it's chemistry related and biochemistry, but
wow.
yeah.
And especially your investigation and study of this, you see the precision, the fine-tuning, the fragility of life, the balance, the tension that exists, and behind it you see a creator that is sustaining our very existence. Fantastic. James, Ryan, it's been a fascinating, insightful discussion. I don't know about you, but my mind truly has been blown on the sheer weight of evidence we've talked about today regarding intelligent design. One of my favorite quotes from Sherlock Holmes is this: "When you have eliminated all which is impossible, then whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." I'm discovering more and more how impossible the idea of life originating randomly is, which leaves the whatever remains to be the existence of an intelligent designer. And for some reason, knowing that I am purposely designed rather than randomly evolving gives me meaning and it gives me hope. But what about you? What are your thoughts after having watched these interviews? Be sure to share your stories and questions on Facebook at Hope at Night. And if you'd like to get more information on some of the video clips shown, be sure to check out our website at hopetv.org/hopeatnight. We're at the end of our show for today. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Hope at Night.